Alrighty then. I'm gonna delve into the question of what defines a friend in 2026. What classes as a friend in today's modern era? Because I feel like, you know, the whole nuance with relationships and heck friendships and stuff now, just people in general, as the years continue to go by. That's a question that becomes very convoluted in order to understand. It's not going to be as simple as a friend is a good person, right? We're past that, I feel like, with people because, I see like these influencers and, even just like regular people, right, who they say they have friends, people who probably have shared interests, There's common denominators in friendships, right? Obviously, you're friends with someone, you vibe with them, you know, they're probably into the same shit as you, that type of shit. But nowadays, it's like with these types of people, like the average fucking person, these fucking influencers, it doesn't matter, right? It just feels like the whole line between what a friend is and then the reality is just like, it's so different. Because you got like just look at the fucking modern kick streamers, right? All these fucking people hanging out with each other. The fucking IRL streamer gurus, and they're all hanging out and they're like, yo, this is my friend, man. Like, we're gonna do some shit, blah blah blah. But it's like then, when they're not in the same room as them, they just fucking talk shit about them behind their back and don't want any affiliation with them. But then when it's like for some sort of like financial or profitable, gain, like they're just all in on it and they're like, yeah, we're friends, and it's like, I know those are like influences, but you can apply that to real life too. Because, I know some people like, examples of people who only know each other because they want that person's connections. They don't actually view them as a friend. They despise that person, but they're like, shit. I don't know if I can use this person. I might be able to, in their mind, they justify shitting on these people, who they claim that they're their friends and just going in on them because in their mind they're like, shit, I gotta call this guy my friend because, like I could use his connections or I could use his skills and shit. I don't actually like him as a person. I could use his skills and it's like, wow, man. The it's like I just miss the days where, you know, when you were younger, the whole at least from my perspective, the whole like concept of what a friend was just someone who, had similar interests to you, someone who you could get along with, and someone who could you could relate to and stuff, right? But that nowadays, those ain't friends, bro. Those ain't what a class as friends, apparently. To these types of people, you know. A friend is just someone who you can say and use, basically. I feel like society's definition of a friend, Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that genuine friends don't exist, Like, there's one guy I know who I talk to on a daily basis. He's my IRL friend, one of my only IRL friends. And yeah, I just play games with him and stuff. We talk about life. I think he's a little bit black pilled too, but he just doesn't want to admit it. But like, he's a nice guy. He's been there for me in the past when I've been struggling, and vice versa. I reciprocate that towards him as well. If he's ever in a pickle, I'll help him out. But you know, it's just like I don't sense any of that anymore nowadays. Like that type of energy, just hanging out with someone for the sake of hanging out with them. Like just the only thing you're giving to people is your time. But it's like nowadays people have to justify being friends with people with other factors. Like they're like, okay, how financially in the shit is this guy, or like, does he have money, or does he have connections? Maybe I can get a job off him, or can he give me some free shit? And it's like, dude, he's not your fucking girlfriend, He's not your fucking provider. He's not your fucking sugar daddy. This is just someone who you're claiming to be fucking friends with. But that's just how it be nowadays, especially in the corporate world, which I can kind of understand because that's a whole other thing. If you're in a company or something, obviously you won't be making connections, right? And yeah, it's kind of like I guess it kind of reminds me of politics in a way because, they do a similar thing too. People in politics, the government, they say they're like all friends with each other and all, we're allies and blah blah blah. But it's like in reality, these people hate each other probably, like behind their backs, but they just know that, life would be easier if they're like, okay, let's just call each other friends and yeah, just leave it at that. Well, not actually being friends, but just tolerating each other. It's like, yeah, that's not a friendship in my mind. Again, a friend is someone who I think anyway, it's just someone who you can, just relate to, have again shared interests, someone who doesn't care, you know, about what else you have besides your fucking personality or just, being someone to hang out with. Like it's as simple as that, you're not fucking interviewing them for to be your fucking, girlfriend or fucking boyfriend or some shit, like they have to provide for you. Because in those type of relationships, yeah, I can understand why you want to be thinking stuff like, all right, how many connections does this guy have? How financially stable is this guy, blah blah blah. Because obviously, in that type of relationship, you gotta be thinking about long-term jeopardy and all that stuff. It's just different in a relationship, right? But friendships, it's like you shouldn't be expecting that shit. You know, you shouldn't want to be friends with someone just because they have money or just because they're fucking famous. I know a lot of people do. That's like it's all the fucking, hive mind of wanting clout and, worth from someone else. But it's like that, in my opinion, that just shouldn't be the main basis to be friends with someone. You should be friends with someone if you like the traits of that person outside of what they can provide you financially or anything for your own benefit besides, you know, anything that's not innate. Like just appreciate the person for who they fucking are, you know, their interests, their fucking hobbies or whatever, you know, like just someone who you can come to for support type thing, but not like they're your fucking sugar daddy, like I said, or like sugar mummy or whoever, right? They're not your fucking partner, they're not your fucking parents, like don't expect shit from them because they're just your friend. It's just so weird. I don't get it, you know? Like again, I can kind of understand with some circumstances, right? The whole best friend, you know, term. Yeah, it's your besties with someone. I can understand expected certain things, but just regular friends, dude, you expecting that shit from them is stupid. And then people wonder why the world is a fucking toxic place. That plays into it. The expectations you have as a friend now, you know? It reminds me of like when I was in college and shit, and you could just talk to people. People didn't really give a shit, like what you were doing with your life for the most part. Presented yourself, personality wise or whatever, you know, just trying to be fucking a nice person, and they reciprocate that, and they're like, hey, you want to be friends. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just living under a fucking rock. Maybe I don't know what a fucking friend is, but. I definitely know that whatever society classes as a friend now, with all this fucking fake shit, just type mentality. It's like snake mentality. Like these politicians and these fucking influencers, they don't actually like each other, man. Like, yeah, some of them do, but like, they're not what they portray, yeah, on the screens. They like, they ain't friends. They're doing it for some sort of gain, right? And I guess you could argue like, yeah, like friendships is a any relationship is transactional, right? So friendships do fall into that category, but not to this like extent, of transaction. Like with these politicians and influencers, they're just like, oh yeah, we're best friends here, we do stuff all the time. In reality, they don't. They only hang out when they're streaming or like when they're about to make a big political decision or whatever the fuck happens in politics, and I don't give a fuck. But there's that type of shit, like stuff where, you know, someone else's qualities and their worth and all that, the other person kind of just uses it to an extent and then passes it off as just being like, oh yeah, it's fine because we're friends, but you don't actually reciprocate that in any way. And it's like, I don't know, man. It just seems all fake to me personally, but yeah. So I guess what is the difference then? What is the difference between an actual friend and a fake friend? Well, in my mind, an actual friend, someone who you can rely on, someone who is, loyal, someone who you could just, relate to, like I said, like someone who just fucking sees you for who you are. I know it sounds corny, but like someone who doesn't really have massive expectations of you, like you're their fucking partner or some shit, or like you're their fucking sugar daddy, you know? Whereas a fake friend, they're basically the opposite of all that. Like these streamers, don't really show any type of fucking like morality in the friendship. They don't actually give a shit about you. And they only pretty much do in moments where it shoots their own agenda type shit. When they need you the most. But they're not the type of friends who would message you telling you how are you, on a somewhat like weekly or monthly basis. They don't even give a shit about your feelings. They just only hang out with you because they just want to use you. And in my mind, that's not a friend, all right? If other people want to think it is, that's cool. But yeah, to me, that ain't a fucking friend. That's just a snake. And that's just a fucking fake friend, in my opinion. And I've had many of those, like many, you know. Um, there's this one guy I knew back in fucking high school, and he was a right prick. But for some reason, I classed him as a friend probably because, didn't really have many, and I was just kind of like forced to put up with him. But it wasn't not like in a snake way, just in a way where because I didn't snake him or anything. I genuinely wanted to be friends with this guy, but he just never he never reciprocated that shit back. You know, he was always talking shit about me. One occasion it was the last straw. He basically gesture maxed, in front of these girls. That newsflash. Nothing ended up happening from it, but I guess he got his 5 seconds of fame from those girls, I guess. And he basically just flat out assaulted me in front of them because he thought it was funny. And yeah, that is not a friend, in my opinion. And that was the day with this guy in particular where I was like, yeah, he's a dick. So yeah. But whatever. I feel like a friend nowadays, they're just getting harder and harder to come by because mostly because of these just unrealistic expectations. It's like modern relationships nowadays, but it's like no type of relationship is safe nowadays, you know? Like the expectations are just too fucking high. You can't even have a fucking friend anymore. You know what I mean? And again, I know that there is some genuine people that exist because, again, I know a guy. He's like one of my only fucking friends, and he's genuine. He wouldn't expect any of that fucking snake type shit from me, vice versa. But still, like nowadays, it feels like that's becoming like the new normality, just seeing friends as people who you could just use and exploit and all that fucking shit. So, yeah. Some days I just guess it is better to be alone. But yeah, I don't know. Uh, maybe I don't know people at all. I don't claim to be an expert on any of this shit, but that's just my thoughts. So yeah, just know that we're all gonna die soon, and there's no sequel. So I guess it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So don't get too pressed by what I said in this video. Again, this is just my thoughts. I don't claim to be an expert on anything. If you disagree or agree with any of the shit I've said in this video, do feel free to enlighten me in the comments because, yeah, I guess I just am just a fucking idiot when it comes to people. They're like the most confusing fucking things in life to understand, to me anyway. So, yeah, that's about it.